The Bridge, a Godzilla-MLP crossover. Written by Tarbtano. Read by Everfreeze Narrations. Chapter 1. The Duel. Today was not a good day to be in the South Pacific. More specifically, it was a horrible night to be anywhere near the Mu Island chain, particularly the lead landmass of Soulgale Island. It was night. A storm of thunder and lightning brewing alongside explosions and sirens. A war was rumbling, one with so much raw power the shifting could be heard as far as Hawaii and Japan. The entire island, its surrounding sea, and its airspace had turned into an all-out battle royale. Tanks, missiles, even some nuclear weapons would be firecrackers to the assaults being launched. Assaults not by man, but by the island's residents and their invaders. A massive taloned paw crashed through the evacuated research building and smashed the only human structure on the landmass. The human onlookers via spy plane cameras or satellite imagery were all too reminded of their mortality. They say in ancient times there were giants that roamed the earth in days past. Now, they were roaming the present, and were at war with one another. Monsters, titans, behemoths, leviathans, kaiju, take the name that you please. Anguirus charged through the remains of the human structures at full speed, bulldozing through debris and explosions like a bull through a Lego set. It was good that the humans had pulled out. Now, he didn't need to worry about fighting with restraint. Engineered by an ancient civilization through a mix of mysticism and lost science, the guardian beast took aim at his target, letting out a roar louder than thunder. The ankylosaur-like kaiju flexed his limbs and launched himself into the air. Quickly, he curled into an armadillo-esque ball, spinning at high speed as the back spines that lined his shell glowed red-hot with searing heat. The Thunderball, as the humans nicknamed it, setting forth a trail of sparks and fires behind it as it found its mark. Spinning around like a massive heated buzzsaw, Anguirus' spines clanged and slashed into another kaiju's back. The target screeched in rage and pain, stumbling forward as it was forced to drop the dinosaur's ally. Vibrant wings shone through the lightning-lit sky as Mothra recovered from the grapple she'd been in. Glad to be free, and now capable of counter-assault, the co-leader of the native faction to the island and the last in a long line of mythical protectors, the most proficient magic user on Terra naturally had thrown herself against the stronger opponents when the fighting broke out. Chirping a thank you to her armored ally before she flew upwards, her former captor wasn't so happy. Crimson-red armor whipped around as a horn of fiery red energy crackled and swung down, parrying Anguirus' attack with so much force it slammed the dinosaur into the ground. Destoroyah spread her wings, and the demonic titan flapped once as she jumped back a bit to gain some distance. The crests on the side of her head crackled with energy as an orb of purple energy fired out and flew straight into Anguirus' shell. The dinosaur's armored hide shielded him from being vaporized by the oxygen destroyer, but the pain ripped through his body and blasted the kaiju back a clear 1,000 feet, digging a deep trench into the ground. Anguirus groaned as he lay on his back in a daze, his thinly armored stomach exposed. Destoroyah knew this well and relished the chance to off one of the rival faction's higher-ups. Cackling out, she reignited and re-energized her central horn into a hellfire, charging forward with each step thundering the earth below her many-clawed feet. Destoroyah was easily one of the most powerful kaiju in existence, and born from the same superweapon that killed the first Godzilla in 1954. A bloodthirsty juggernaut, able to, albeit barely, survive the old king when he was at the peak of his power. She'd returned years later and was a force on the battlefield. If it wasn't for some small sliver of loyalty the Precambrium life form had for her cohorts amongst their faction, she'd have usurped power from their leader and tried to kill him long ago. She was durable, extremely potent both up close and at range, and thanks to flight, mobile. If there was but one flaw to her other than her slow speed, it was something Death incarnate was no good at psychologically. She didn't work well in teams, and Geras and his allies did. As Destoroyah was about to gut the still groggy dinosaur alive, a pair of golden beams accompanied by enchanted thunderbolts brighter than lightning itself struck her square in the face. Destoroyah let out a screech of pain as she was blasted back again and again by the unrelenting assault, as Mothra lowered herself down to between the monster and Geras as he got to his feet, the insect repeatedly blasting the demon with divine energy. War was raging all around the island. It all started suddenly at midnight as Xenilla, once dubbed Space Godzilla, landed without warning onto the island. The bastard offshoot of the Godzilla lineage had returned from the dark side of the moon. Leading the charge with his cohorts the humans had nicknamed the Mutations. The island's inhabitants were quick to respond. Dozens of Terra Defenders, another nickname by the UN, proof the world's leaders weren't always imaginative, rallied behind the current Godzilla and charged into a Titan-sized gang war. More and more kaiju kept pouring in on either side. Mothra flew in from Infant Island. Gamora was deployed by his master from a nearby base. Yongari awakened from his slumber outside of Seoul and joined into the fray. A whole flock of Yaos had drawn in, hoping to devour any corpses they found, with Gamera following them in tow. The alien Exilian Empire and their allies even took notice off-planet and revved up their teleporters, deploying their own Monster X, the Nebulon's Confederation's cyborg brothers, Gigan and Megalon, alongside the Millennium Collective's Orga, in hopes the Chaos would be a grand chance to off a few of their thorns in their side from the last failed invasion. After an hour, the UN finally noticed about 80% of the world's kaiju and half of the known alien monsters had converged on one point and activated the mecha units. Kiryu leading the flight to the island, flanked by Mechagodzilla 2 and Mogira. Originally stopping at the battle zone's fringes to try to contain the fighting, they were soon targeted and the mechanical trio was forced to engage. All in all, over 50 beasts, aliens, cyborgs, and machines were fighting in a 2-square-mile area, and it was pure chaos. High up in space on an orbital platform satellite, a machine resembling a massive barrel was stirring to life. Inscribed on its side was the Global Defense logo, along with the weapon's name, Dimension Tide. It was a prototype weapon, possibly more powerful than any other, not because of pure destructive capabilities, but what it did. It destroyed nothing. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It imprisoned anything it hit. Or at least, that was the best theory behind the black hole launcher's action that the world's scientists could guess to. It had failed back in the early 2000s, allowing its target to escape. It had since been rebuilt, modified, and grown into a massive launching platform. The hope was the larger cannon size would ensure the black hole would crush anything it enclosed over, or move it to a faraway plane. Given how vast the universe was in comparison to the livable landmass, it was considered a good trade-off for not knowing where it sent them, or in what shape. It seemed to be now capable of destroying or permanently remove the monsters, and that's all the science teams and the public cared about. Little did anyone know, however, outside of 1 or 2 cases of the personnel involved with a certain giant dragonfly incident, the additions did nothing to change what Dimension Tide really was. It had never been fired, but given the mass concentration of kaiju in one area with acceptable losses, a prototype shot was ordered, and the machine revved to life as it charged. Deep within the war zone, 2 of a kind were trying to tear each other apart. Glowing backspines lit up the night as blue and red beams of pure energy made contact with each other, spurring a massive explosion that made the valley they were in a few dozen feet deeper. Rain fell in torrents as 2 pairs of red eyes glared into one another, energy glowing out of their maws. The leaders of the mutation and defender factions circled each other. One was a dark navy blue, 2 tall crystal spires jutting out from his shoulders as rows of fin-like crystals that ran down its back, ending in a trident-shaped spike on the tip of its long tail, which crackled with energy. The beast hissed, its 2 sets of small tusks mounted on the sides of either jaw flexing as lightning crashed, the skyward light gleaming on its golden head crest. Born of a black hole, the usurper to the throne, and easily one of the most dangerous living beings of all time, Xenilla. Across from him, a charcoal-gray leviathan let out a roar that shattered any remaining glass at the research compound after Anguirus charged through it. A massive tail smacked down onto the tree line behind it, topping 700-foot-tall oak trees like toothpicks. The first modern Godzilla, as the world had known him since his emergence in 1985, was long dead, having gone into nuclear meltdown in the mid-90s and dying as a result. That's to say, however, the throne wasn't vacant. Lightning crashed and struck a battery of dorsal fins that lit up in the electrical glow that evaporates seas of falling water, whilst leaving the beast itself completely unharmed. He may have grown to look slightly different than his predecessor, his adoptive father, but to all that knew this titan, there was no question. What was once an egg hatching in a laboratory, raised by a kindly soul, was now the mighty 30-story Leviathan who served as humanity's protector since his ascension. The king of the monsters, the new Godzilla, Jr., was very much alive, and in way of raw power, he was his father's son. 2 look so alike both in genes and appearance, yet so radically different in origin. 1, a bastard child born alone in space. The other, a natural birth, growing with the protection of the mightiest kaiju of all time as a parent. Both with the same progenitor, the same parent. No psychic humans were present, so no one would know what the Goliaths were saying. But the glare they gave one another spoke volumes over the torrents and rain and crack of thunder. A raindrop fell, and the 2 charged one another. Godzilla Jr. rushed full sprint across the gorge, shaking the earth with each 60,000-ton stomp. As Xenilla's shoulder crystals glowed with raw power and rocketed the special Saurian forward via telekinesis. Both crackled with blue and red energy, raw nuclear power that roared throughout every cell in their bodies, causing minor explosions in the air, raindrops, and ground around them as matter's physical structure ripped apart into plasma under the intense energy. Both Saurians were glowing bright enough for the glow to be visible from the horizon as they collided together in an explosion that leveled the mountainside. Raindrops, tons of stone, and even whole trees were launched up in the air in a vast bubble as the explosion rang out, forcing all in the valley but the 2 quarreling brothers up into the air. Floating up into the air, the debris all came crashing down in the valley, the ruined remains of the mountainside, and in the sea around the island. The war zone was covered in a cloud of debris as 2 massive forms fought up close in the storm as lightning struck both of their bodies. Godzilla snarled, digging his foot into the ground and spinning around, swinging his massive tail in a spiral that ended up in a direct hit square in the face of Zanila. The spatial beast screeched in pain, the blow having fractured his skull bones briefly before his regeneration took effect, painfully healing the injury in a matter of seconds. Pain in harm, pain in healing. Between the 2, Zanila was now pissed. Collapsing backwards some distance in an afterstrike daze, the cosmic kaiju put his hands together and spread them as his shoulder crystals glowed a bright white glow. A perfect, double-pointed crystal several hundred feet long formed in the space between his paws. Zanila cackled with glee as he gripped the crystal like a club and spun it around. Godzilla didn't have the time to react before Zanila smashed the crystal into his face and then swung again, bashing the weapon with glowing brilliance across his stomach. Fighting through the pain, the king of the Earth Kaiju lashed out as fast as he could with his right hand as Xenilla was about to bring the club down again on his skull, catching the blow. Godzilla pushed up as Xenilla pushed down, neither able to wrench free the weapon from the other's grasp. Two pairs of eyes flashed colors, one blue, one crimson, as energy crackled through their bodies. Like a mirror image, both Saurians balled a quasi-fist with their free hand that the energy condensed into. Limbs glowing, they both threw a punch aimed at one another's face, only for the fists to connect mid-swing, and two handheld nuclear pulses went off at the same time. The attacks smashed together, and a brilliant white light grew between the two and absorbed both in a crack of an energy-driven explosion. The crystal club shattered as both Godzilla and Zanila were sent sliding across the ground, both of their front halves of their bodies badly burned but rapidly healing. As long as they both had energy to expend, they could heal. As long as they could heal, neither could kill each other. So as long as they had any of those occurring, they would fight. Xenilla was the first to roar, slamming his long tail into the ground as lightning crackled. Godzilla stomped into the ground, shaking the earth as a second roar accompanied the sound of thunder. The message was simple. As long as it took to complete, even if it destroyed the whole island, this fight was till the death. High above and to the east, the shimmering silver body of a mecha flew through the air, pursued by several beings resembling giant bats. Mogira's pilots, Koji, Kiyoshi, and Yuki, looked behind themselves as the Gaios Trio's maws began to glow with a brilliant golden light. Grabbing the lead directional control, Yuki craned the stick back, ordering the mecha to deploy its air brakes and spin around. Kiyoshi's helmet's heads-up display beeped as several red circles appeared over the central screen, hovering over each Gaios.
Auxiliary Major Cannon locked.
One Gaios' maw flashed a yellow light, and a golden straight beam fired out, slicing into the trees to Mogira's side, and craning its head over to strike the robot with its assault. Yuki yanked the stick to the side, forcing their mecha to flank to the right to avoid being sliced by the ray. Yuki grunted.
Well, what are you waiting for? McDonald's drive-thru? Shoot the bastards!
Koji flipped several switches and gripped the control stick, squeezing down on its trigger. Mogira's conical arms rose up, and purple color energy sparked along their smooth surface before twin neon fuchsia beams of energy fired out from the tips. The two beams hit two of the Gaios dead center, and searing plasma burned through the lower Kaiju's torsos, shooting off into the night sky. Shifting its arms, the beams crossed right into the third Gaios before it could react, engulfing it in a massive fireball that soon crashed to the earth below. Works every time. Koji chuckled before spying the duel of the nuclear saurians below. Some of their systems were still rattling from the last explosion. All three pilots were getting deja vu to the 10th power. Kiyoshi was the first to speak.
Damn, they're really going at it. Looks like Junior can still brawl just as good as his old man. Think we should give him a hand?
Yuki looked on at the conflict for a time, before hiding back old memories as he groaned and rolled his eyes.
We're staying out of that one. We're needed elsewhere.
The aged soldier's gaze hardened at the flashes of light and raw power bursting forth from a battle involving someone he'd seen growing up over the decades, from a round, docile youth into one of the most powerful creatures on the planet. Warrior's respect was cast.
That's his fight.
The younger pilot was about to retort when the hardened face of Akane Yashiro, the G-Force mecha commander and Kiryu's pilot, flashed onto their monitors. Mogira's pilots instinctively flinched. Hell has no fury like this woman's scorn.
What are you three still doing down there? I ordered an evac 4 minutes ago. Get away from the island!
The trio looked at each other in a half-confused, half-worried manner. Only Yuki had enough courage, stubbornness, or just plain stupidity to retort.
While you were busy running, we were busy killing 3 of those damned giant bats. Half of our comm systems got knocked offline by the EMP released by Godzilla and Zanila fighting below. How many kaiju did you even down on this run? 9.
Yuki shut up immediately. Koji, still trying not to provoke a superior, radioed in.
Why was the evac sounded?
Miki, the pilot of the other remaining mech unit, chimed in.
Headquarters has radioed in the Dimension Tide 2 and is about to fire. Get out or you'll be sucked into the black hole.
Kiyoshi's eyes widened as he pulled his microphone closer, half in shock.
Black hole? But the good monsters are still on the island.
A small sniffled crying sound was audible on Miki's end, and she went silent, unable to speak. How could she, when she knew what was coming from high orbit? A cane snarled and barked back.
That's an oxymoron, soldier. You can't put good and monster in the same sentence. Now get away from that damned island. That is an order.
Arcane barked out loud enough to burst an eardrum before she cut off her feed. There was a silence in the cockpit. Yuki was the first to break it, regretful as he was to do so. Cold as the old soldier was, he had half the mind to try and fly in and grab his once charge, only for the earthquake bursting forth from the battle to show he was woefully ill-equipped.
Come on, you heard the lady. This place is as good as dead.
He craned on the flight control, and Mogira's thrusters ignited to full strength, rocketing the mecha off to the safe distance to join its sibling units. On some level, they were praying. Kaiju were impossible beings before, surviving what they shouldn't have, time and time again. This time, they hoped so. Energy surged within the two brothers, eclipsing their beaten, bleeding, and bruised bodies with every last ounce of power they each had. If their foe's plan of assault didn't kill them, exhaustion just might. The next attack was a make-or-break shot. A pair of blue and crimson suns grew out from the crater. Both stomped into the ground and roared over the thunder as the suns drew down and were absorbed by their back fins, which crackled with energy like they never had before. So much heat was being put out, the forests hundreds of feet behind them had caught on fire, and rain was evaporating before it could even hit the ground. Two balls of energy, hotter than the surface of Earth's core, formed in their throats. Miles above, space and time were twisting as a black sphere formed at Dimension Tide's tip, physically sucking up any bits of spatial debris that floated by for miles. A black hole had formed, and with the push of a button at G-Force headquarters, it fired with a soundless boom and rocketed to Soulgale. Two pillars of glowing light shone like miniature suns against the night sky. So much raw power being shot up into the air, the clouds were beginning to split apart, and curtains of rain were pushed aside. All at once, dozens of monsters ceased combat like a freezing frame and dispersed, knowing they had to get away from something they instinctively knew was coming. Godzilla was known globally by man and beast alike as the king of monsters, and Xenilla was his equal, the challenger to the throne. Two kings were about to give it their all, and all knew to get out of the way when they did so. That is, but a certain trio of titans who were engaged against a hell beast not far away. A combination of loyalty and camaraderie on one side, and demented psychosis on the other, keeping their 3-on-1 duel in a deadlock. All were unaware of certain doom that broke through the stratosphere. Godzilla and Xenilla's bodies glowed in dueling blue and crimson light as they put all power into their limit for one final assault with their signature beams. One of nuclear hellfire, and the other of a star's coronal wrath. As they charged, both knew one factor fully well. If this next blow landed, either they'd hit and kill their foe, or they'd keel over from the effort. It was a slow race to who would charge up first, one that neither of them won. Just as the brothers unleashed twin blasts aimed at one another, two that would collide with the force of several of the most powerful nuclear bombs crashing into each other and liquefying the rocks below them, Dimension Tide's black hole impacted the island and its 6 remaining inhabitants. In a soundless expanse, the force of the crushing blackness fused with the force the twin Leviathan's energy and brought forth Dimension Tide's actual power. Soulgale was wiped clean of the presence of the 6 most notorious kaiju in history. The beasts, once fighting to the death, watched in awe as it was all over in a moment, before unanimously deciding it was time to stop. On the mutant side, dreams of conquest and becoming the new leader of the faction quickly took root as they departed and bedded down for the night. Monster X snorted as he levitated himself to slowly fly alongside Gigan and Megalon, with Orga wading into the surf after them, retreating southward with the disgruntled feeling he'd been cheated out of his final battle. On the other side, many cries of mourning sounded through Soulgale through the night as many Defender Kaiju looked upon the places their comrades once stood, taken from them before any could react. Humans around the globe either bowed their head in sadness at the loss of guardian beings such as Mothra, but cheered and celebrated in the streets over Destoroyah and Zenilla's apparent demise. For many more, it was somewhere in between. Deep in their cockpits, the mech pilots were speechless. All were silent, as Yuki quietly cast a small salute, and Miki shed a small tear. All, however, were more wrong than they could ever imagine. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed, only moved, displaced, changed into energy, or morph into a new state. All 4 just happened. It was near 5 a.m. in Ponyville, but all but a few souls were still awake at the late hour. On the balcony of the library, a purple alicorn adjusted her telescope as she scanned Luna's nocturnal skyline with her telescope. An unsure look spread across the princess's face. A tiny groan echoed out behind her, accompanied by the plip-plop of small feet. Spike walked out towards the balcony and opened the doorway, sleepily poking his head out with sleep-deprived eyes.
Twilight? Why are you still up?
Twilight ceased her magical spell and put down her notepad, the hum having roused her assistant from his sleep. The alicorn lowered her head and flapped her ears. She was sorry she had taken the baby dragon's rest, but she couldn't shake the oddest of feelings. Owlicious hooted, flapping his wings and flying inside through the cracked door.
Sorry, Spike. I just couldn't shake this feeling, and it kept me up,
she uttered with a sigh, glancing up at the sky. Spike tilted his head, his will to assist his adoptive sister kicking in as he walked out onto the balcony, stretching his arms and yawning to try to shake off his sleepiness.
Like, what kind of feeling?
Twilight sighed, shaking her head slightly.
I have no idea, Spike. Just concern.
Spike stood up on the tip of his toes as he looked through the telescope, trying to maybe figure out what she had been looking at.
Concern? For what?
Twilight turned and looked out over the horizon, hoping she'd spot what went wrong in an instant.
Just concern that something is about to happen.
A deep groan sounded off as a crimson-red body slumped itself out from a river and onto the bank, half covered in weeds. Gagging up water, it weakly dragged itself ashore and fell down on its stomach before rolling to its side, kicking up dust clouds at the disturbance. Consciousness flickered as Destoroyah tried to flex her wings to no avail. They were still attached, but drastically weak, something she could regretfully tell from her whole body. Her mind, however, was still fresh and active as she struggled to move.
What the hell happened? Zen and that brat were going at it, and then that black light. Where am I?
Trying to move again, Destoroyah soon ceased, as not only the feeling of weakness held her back. The instant she moved her forelimbs, she knew something wasn't right. She couldn't feel her fingers. She had none. The crustacean-like kaiju snarled.
Great. Probably back to juvenile form and lost my hands. Damn dinosaurs. It'll take weeks to absorb enough matter to regain full form.
Contemplating finding the nearest nuclear plant and trying to speed up the process while fighting back the blackness of unconsciousness, Destoroyah tried to lift her spear-like juvenile limb over her eyes to block out the sunlight shining above. Then she knew something was definitely wrong. Her limb wasn't jagged and sharp anymore. It was wide, smooth, round, and hairy. Just before she blacked out, she distinctly heard, and for the first time, understood a human-like voice. A young female based on the pitch, and the sound of several footsteps approaching her.
Oh my gosh. Are you okay, ma'am? Scoots, get the wagon!